in place. So the world has to get used to Russian crude and American crude vanishing at the same time. Ugh. West Africa is also going to come into play, because if you're European and American crude is gone and Russian crude is gone, these are all former European colonies. The Europeans have linguistic, political, military, strategic, economic links to all of them. There's going to be some very heavy conversations that are very one way, with the Europeans demanding that the energy that flows out of West Africa no longer go to East Asia, because the Europeans are proximate and they can do something about it if they really have to. So I expect the broad scale redirection of all West African crude north to Europe. Here are a couple of graphics from Accidental Superpower that we have updated. So thank you to Michael and Quinn for turning this around so fast. I know how much of a bitch this one was, but you can see what the flows are. So starting on the right, everything that is in yellow is something that is going to be redirected from Western Africa going to Europe. So all told, you're talking about 2.5 million barrels of flows. If you're on the left, it's a much more complicated graphic, because the Americans are crude exporters in this market already. Everything again in yellow is something that is no longer going to make it to East Asia. They're going to be completely dependent upon the red from the Persian Gulf. The Americans will still be in play, but it's probably going to be spread out a little. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. The Americans are no longer going to be in play because of a crude oil ban, so that purple just goes away. And the blue, that's going to be steadily dwindling as Westerners quit assisting the Russians with their energy flows. So the East Asian system really does become a one-stop shop, and the premium that the East Asians are going to have to pay for energy compared to everyone else is just going to be mammoth. Speaking of price, I considered not giving you price numbers, but that seemed kind of a jerk move. I just want you to understand that we are moving into fundamentally unexplored territory in energy pricing. So what I'm going to give you here is less of a forecast and more of an educated guess based on everything that I provided so far. So first, the idea of a global price is going away. We're moving into sequestered regional price systems. The North American system will be one, the European system will be another one, and the Asian system will be a third. There will be interactions among them, most specifically when it comes to product. So while I expect Biden to ban oil crude exports, I do not expect him to ban product exports, especially if we're talking about within North America. So there are ways to play the arbitrage here. And once the US shuts out, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's shale dominant. We get some stuff that comes in from the Canadian system. Maybe we'll be able to get a little bit more from the Canadian system, although their time to target for fields is really very long. But the key thing to remember is in less than 2 months, you can turn around everything that's going on in a shale field. And in that environment, I think a $70 ceiling for US crude makes a lot of sense, because at that price, most of American shale is price competitive today. And if they can't pour it into other countries, that's where it stops. Second, Europe. The North Sea is not enough. The North Sea plus West Africa is really not enough. And from the point in those kinds of projects, you're talking deep offshore, semi-Arctic, high wind, African operating environments, weak rule of law. From the point that you actually start the work to the point that you get first real crude is usually about 4 years. They don't have that kind of time. They don't have that kind of capital. And so we're going to see insufficient crude for this region moving forward. I consider the floor to be about $150 a barrel. You can imagine what the arbitrage is going to be like on a refined product from North America to Europe. It's going to be intense. And then finally, the East Asian system is absolutely screwed. Everything is dependent upon the Middle East being calm. Everything is dependent on the Saudis and the Iranians getting along. Everything is based on the Saudis expanding output on a schedule that they like in East Asia, which they've never done. So I think a $200 floor for East Asia is a reasonable starting point. And every time something cooks off either between India and Pakistan, or with pirates in Southeast Asia, or between Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, you get a price spike because it interrupts production. And the United States is no longer in a military position to do anything about it. We really don't have a naval force in the Persian Gulf at all anymore. And we're down to a single digit of hundreds of troops in Syria, which I don't think that's going to last much longer either. And even if it did, it doesn't matter to oil. So three different, very simple, three different sequestered markets with very different price mechanics. For those of you who know oil energy history, this is what the world looked like before the world wars. It took globalization and the Americans leveling the playing field for everyone to combine us to a single oil price. So really, this is just a return to what used to be normal. There are a couple adjacent sectors to this that I want to close out with. The first one is green tech. These are the materials that go into green tech. And as you can see, electric cars require a lot more than conventionals. This is specifically for the drivetrain. If you're going to talk about the whole frame, you're talking about a different product set. So for the drivetrain, you need a lot different materials to make an electric system work versus conventional. And the same holds true on the lower section for power generation. Anything that runs on electricity just needs a fundamentally different sort of input stream than something that runs on fuel. Now, the advantage of green tech, of course, is that renewables, the fuel is free, but you still have to pay all that upfront cost to get the stuff installed. Why am I bringing that up now? Copper, nickel, zinc, the three things I've outlined in red, those supply chains are Russia-centric. If you move away from an oil standard, we know what the oil supply chain looks like. Canada, Russia, Iran, Iraq, Saudi, Angola, we know it. We might not enjoy it all the time, but we understand it. You want to replace that with an EV-based system, with a green tech system. You replace the oil supply chain with 13 others, most of which are just as hairy as the oil supply system. And in the case of copper and nickel and zinc, and if you're talking about bodies, aluminum, you cannot do that without Russia. So this melon scooping of Russia out of the global system removes EVs from discussion in most places. There are a couple exceptions. The Western Hemisphere looks pretty good, especially since the Western Hemisphere will still be able to access Southeast Asia and specifically Australia. But anywhere else, the supply chain system is not going to be able to make these products in mass. And then finally, I want